Beneath Our Feet, written by Max Aaron of UnsettlingStories.com. Performed by Kristen Holland. I have an African gray parrot named Perry. He's been part of the family for 25 years. I've known him my whole life. When my parents were alive, they taught him a bunch of words and phrases, and he'd always make us laugh. Lately, though, he's been saying things we never taught him. Certainly not things we'd ever say either. Nancy, my wife, was in the kitchen with her friends the other day when they all heard Perry squawk, "It bathes in tears and rains beneath our feet." They all laughed and wondered what the hell I could have been watching on TV for the bird to pick up a phrase like that. They continued their lunch, but 10 minutes later, Perry started again. "It rains beneath our feet. It rains beneath our feet. It rains beneath our feet." Then he squawked and screamed and rattled his cage so hard that he almost fell off the table. Nancy checked to see if he was okay, and he chirped and allowed it to stroke his head with a finger. He seemed no worse for wear. That night, after I'd gotten home and Nancy had told me about Perry's weirdness, I let him out of his cage to fly around the house. He was always well behaved and never knocked anything off shelves or shit on things we cared about. He stepped out of the cage and under the table. But he didn't take off. He just stood there, looking around. "Go ahead, Perry," I coaxed. "Go get some exercise." He remained stationary, but he watched me, the pupils wide in his beige eyes. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. I was concerned for the little guy. He'd always been in great health and never acted weird. This was entirely unlike him. Perry cocked his head and stared into my eyes. For some reason, I felt a chill run down my spine, even before he spoke, almost like I knew he was about to frighten me. In a deep tone I'd never heard from him in all my years, he uttered, "Beneath your feet." Something knocked on the floor directly below where I was standing. I jumped about a mile and stepped away from the bird, who hadn't moved. "Still beneath your feet," he said. The knock came again. It was 100 times louder and so powerful, my ankle twisted under me and I fell sideways onto the couch. The floorboards where I'd been standing bulged upward. One had cracked. Nancy came running downstairs asking, "What the hell was that?" I told her to go in the kitchen and call the police. Someone was in the cellar. Nancy and I waited by the door for the police to arrive. They got there quickly. We let them in and they went into the basement. A couple minutes later, they came back up. "No one's there," they told us. "Wait, then what?" The older cop cut us off. "Can you come look at something with us?" "Okay," Nancy said. "But what is it?" "Just come downstairs." We followed the cops into the basement. Neither Nancy nor I go down there very often. I was a little embarrassed by how gross and dusty it was, until I saw marks in the dust-covered floor and countertops. "Are those footprints?" I asked, more to myself than to anyone around. "That's what we thought," said the younger officer, "but they look pretty weird for footprints." We got to the part of the cellar that was under where I'd been standing. The cops aimed their flashlights at the wood above our heads. An indentation was clearly visible. It almost looked like a punch, but the shape wasn't of any hand we'd ever seen. It looked like it had too many knuckles, too many bones. What the hell? I traced my finger over the indentations. I shivered. Upstairs, Perry squawked. The floorboards around the indentation began to leak. Liquid dripped into my mouth and I sputtered. It was salty and reminded me of the taste you get after crying for a long time. "Did something spill upstairs?" the older cop asked. "Yeah, maybe the bird knocked something over." "Is that him making all that noise?" I nodded. "He's been weird all day." We headed back upstairs and the cops told us to call if we have any other concerns about someone being in our house. Nancy and I thanked them and they left. I stared at the damage to the living room floor. Perry hadn't knocked anything over, but there was a small puddle on the wood. He'd gone back into his cage and sat in the corner, quietly clucking. I approached the cage. There were little wet footprints around it. They were his prints. It looked like he might have lapped up some of the water that had been on the floor while we were in the cellar. "What's going on, bud? You having a rough day?" I tried not to think about what had happened. There had to be a reason for it. Maybe the wood had warped. The basement's always been damp and gross. That had to be it. The wood warped and trapped moisture was dripping out of the fracture point. But then there was Perry. Perry stared at the bottom of the cage, still clucking. He didn't look up. I reached out to pet his head, but he struck my finger with his beak, not hard enough to do any damage, but with enough force to let me know he wanted none of my affection. I looked at my pet with sympathy, wondering if he was just getting old and losing his mind. He remained in the corner, trembling slightly. Something caught my eye. There was red on the cage where he was sitting. I looked closer. It was blood. "What happened, Perry?" I asked, and reached inside to pick him up, knowing I was in for a pecking. Before I could grab him, he spoke in that same chilling voice.
"It will bathe in blood and claim the sky."
He paused, then slowly spoke.
27 days.
I picked up my bird to see how badly he was hurt, but before I could assess his wound, I saw what was in the corner where he was sitting. Something entirely unexpected. Perry, my male African gray parrot, had been sitting on a bloody black egg. It's been 24 hours since all this started. Perry seems no worse for wear, but he fights whenever we try to pick him up. He does everything he can to remain by the egg. I don't know what's happening to him, and I have no idea what he means with any of the stuff he's saying. Whenever he talks now, it's just 26 days, followed by the word hours. The number of hours keeps going down. And I haven't heard it, but Nancy swears she hears soft knocking coming from the basement each time Perry makes his announcements.